Good morning. My name is Natalie Gregg, and I'm here for the podcast of the Law Office of Natalie Gregg, where we believe that your most precious asset is your family. Today, I have a very special guest with me, Monika Logan. She is a licensed therapist, and she's here to discuss a very important topic. It is the dynamics of resist and refuse. Welcome to our show.
Thank you for having me, Natalie.
Of course. So we've worked together extensively, and you have both helped clients in the therapeutic setting, and you've also testified in the courtroom.
Yes.
Could you tell our viewers out there what your background is?
Sure. So I'm a licensed professional counselor, and I'm also a licensed sex offender treatment provider.
And could you tell us what that second part, we understand counselor, but
Sure.
What does the second part mean?
Well, so in the state of Texas, to work with someone who has been convicted of a sexual offense, you have to have an LSOTP, and there's a lot of training with that, about 3,000 hours. And of course, we have to have continuing education units as well. But it really ties into a lot of family law as well, because the psychosexuals can help determine someone's thought process. Certainly not a guilt or innocence, right? But it helps determine thought process. And then we can also do what's called a risk assessment. And the risk assessment answers the question, what's the likelihood that this person would engage in the type of crime again, right?
Do any family law practitioners employ you to do those types of assessments?
Sometimes, yes. I can have a little bit of both. Sometimes it's the criminal attorneys and they have a pending case. And then other times I'll have family law attorneys reach out and they will try to maybe tie that into possession and access, which we cannot.
Okay, so as to possession and access, this is one of the hardest topics, and this is the most controversial. Many people will go out there and they will Google this word, parental alienation. And that's an old word, right?
Generally, yes. It's maybe I would want to say frowned upon or not used as frequently. Our terminology is certainly in a state of evolution. I think that it started off very narrow from an older theory in the 80s when the tender years presumption was about, and then it changed to the standards of best interest. And around that time, the language started changing too. We went from parental alienation syndrome, then we went to parental alienation, and then we go into different words such as the alienated child. And then from there's so many more. We have parent-child contact problems and resist-refuse dynamics. So each one has some nuances, but the most important thing is that you know the definition behind it and you properly use it in your context, right? However, parental alienation syndrome, we don't use that one, and we generally don't use parental alienation simply just because of the negative connotation that comes with it.
Well, and alienation is a very strong and harsh word, right? And,
generally, yes.
And syndrome implies that you have some sort of disorder or diagnosable issue that's in maybe the DSM-5.
Generally, yes. There's a saying about labels. Many do not like labels, that they're for jars, or maybe that's just my saying, but labels are for jars, not for people.
And to that end, I get a lot of calls, even at the beginning of intake, and they say, I read Divorce Poison, or I read Rorschach, and I know that this is happening. And a lot of times, they'll send mounds of evidence before we even have a discussion. And do you find that this alienation, this resist-refuse dynamic, that this is something that it's almost a solution or something people can blame what is happening? A client can blame, this is why my child is not in an appropriate relationship with me or doesn't seem to get as excited around me as a divorced parent as mom or as dad.
So for starters, first, the book is wonderful. And there are cases where one parent where they're the bad guy and they are driving it and they're saying negative things to the child, maybe intentionally or not. However, you never want that to be a starting place from a therapeutic angle. or maybe even the attorney. So when all that data, when it's received, the banker's box or however much information comes and they say, yes, and we have the book and we have all these documents, I always, when I train other therapists, I say pause and slow down, because you need to start at a point of, I don't know. Maybe it's a resist refuse case. Maybe it's not. So you also need to have training in domestic violence to consider this could be a case where there's been intimate partner violence. Maybe there's truly some irrational alienation occurring. That could be. But you don't start there. You start with, I think this might be some of attorneys' favorites, I don't know.
And so we throw out a lot of words as counselors and as attorneys, and a lot of times my clients are like, can you put that in layman's terms? Or what are you actually saying? So can you explain a classic, just an example of what parental resist, refuse, or those dynamics that we're talking about? What does that look like clinically? Like when someone will tell you a narrative, this is what happened. I think it's this. They want to put that label on it.
Sure. So one of the parents will say, I have not been able to see my kids in, let's say, X amount of time. Maybe it's a couple of months, and some parents, it might be a year or more. And then the other parent will say, they were a really bad parent. They engaged in ABC behaviors, and they'll describe these horrific behaviors. And so you're getting completely different stories, right? One from mom, one from dad, and then you meet the child, and then, of course, they have their own version. You really have to consider this as, look at all the different, consider an alternative hypothesis for what's being told by each parent, and just consider, I don't know. But so typically you're going to get a story from mom, a story from dad, and usually they are not on the same page. They're diverse. Every once in a while it's a little bit in the middle, and you'll have both. So your starting point, the way I approach it, is I meet with both of the parents, sometimes 3, 4, 5 sessions. It just depends, very case specific. And then I'll meet with the child. Sometimes having that data too to back up, because sometimes one of the parents, they really are fabricating, right? And sometimes they're not. That's where, again, it's so important to start with, I don't know what's going on with this family.
So in some of my clients, we've had something as minor as, I believe that my wife or ex-wife is alienating or engaging in this behavior because my child used to call me daddy, and now it's just father. And sometimes I have to correct my clients and say, maybe developmentally, even if you were still married, your kid might just have switched to that term because they were embarrassed on the soccer field and they heard their other friend say father instead of daddy. So like maybe we shouldn't take everything so personally, right?
Oh, absolutely. So you want to look at various factors, because if it's that alone, they're calling the other parent mom or dad, but it's really me, I'm mom or dad. So you need to look at multiple factors and consider, okay, is it just the name? Are they focused just on the name? Or do they have a lot of other complaints, if you will, that the other parent's doing? Just a name alone? No, because sometimes you'll have let's say a stepmother, for instance, and they're saying they call her mommy and the other one's mom. Some parents are okay with that. So I think that it's working through what's acceptable in your family. Sometimes it's nicknames. They agree on a nickname. So it comes down to, it just depends.
So I had a client the other day say they went to a game and the stepmother was saying goodbye to the child. And my client was, the mom, the biological mother. And she said, can you believe the stepmother said, bye, I love you? And I said, yeah, I can. That's actually really sweet. And the kid said, I love you back. And so that would not be a resist refuse. That kid is appropriately bonded to two different people. One obviously is biological mom, and the other one is new stepmom. It probably didn't help that she had, a size 2 and maybe some augmentation, and she was wife 3.0,
Mm-hmm.
So on the spectrum of names and then saying I love you at a game, but then down to all the way, I've seen false allegations of horrendous child abuse that has been completely invented. How do you explain that in a resist refuse dynamic?
Oh, that's a tough one.
Okay.
Right? And I do receive a fair amount of those cases just probably because of the offender license that I have as well when you have those allegations. That's where I think it's very important for the helping professionals to follow the AFCC guidelines, the Association of Family and Conciliation Courts. They have a set of guidelines for court-involved therapists. Where I'm going with this is because that is really important where you look at some of the data. You can get the CPS reports if both attorneys, not one, if both attorneys will approve whatever data can help with that, that is really important in those cases. And you always have to remember too, and that's for the therapist, is we are not the trier of facts, right? That's not our role. So in other words, if we have an appointment order and we are to work with the family, sure, we always want to consider safety first, but we don't have all the evidence that comes into the courtroom. We are only getting a portion of it. Sometimes if the therapists don't do a thorough job, they're only getting the story of mom and dad, and they're saying dad or mom, touched the kid in some inappropriate way. We're always going to have to report that, right? Because we're mandated reporters to CPS. But we are not the trier of facts. So that's very important where it goes back to make sure you get the data as long as both attorneys approve.
And so when we have attorneys listening here today, what are some of the things that you would like to see in terms of the information releases, whether they be HIPAA releases or history with CPS or police reports? What would you like to see in cooperation for intake as a counselor in this situation?
Thank you, because we really need to cover that. The first thing is I want to make sure that we can legally look at the documents, right? From a therapeutic angle. I would want to make sure that, do they have an opening? Very important. So it's my preference and policy. I ask both attorneys, reach out, say, hey, do you have an opening? Because many of us who specialize in family forensics and are trained, we are packed. And so we don't want clients calling angry saying, my attorney said to call, and I'm like, well, wait, we don't have an opening. But to circle back to the things that we need, so we really need a very good appointment order where we are specifically named. We need to be able to have covered the HIPAA releases. Very important that it goes crossways so we can talk to both attorneys. And I think that's where it would help attorneys to clarify why we need to have cross releases. Because if I'm mentioning the other parent's name to opposing, even on the same call, you're technically divulging HIPAA information, right?
Right. And a lot of parents don't even understand that even if their child's in counseling, unless there is something that is an imminent threat to their safety and welfare through homicidal or suicidal issues or a mandated abuse, that they don't get just a written report of what you talked about. And they're oftentimes, my clients are very confused. Well, the counselor didn't just debrief me for 30 minutes afterwards. And then I explained to them that this is not something that we do anymore. I think in the old days, you would just kind of, have a cup of coffee with the counselor and they would just tell you what was going on. But that's definitely not something that clients should ever expect. Is that correct?
Well, it goes back to, it depends on the type of case that we have. You want them to understand the process. To make sure I'm understanding your question is you really want to make sure that clients understand the process. And one way that you can mitigate problems such as that is by having all of your information accessible to the attorneys. So in other words, keep it online, maybe on your website, email it out, and then go over it with your client. And so they know how your process works, okay? So you do want to spend time going over all of your paperwork and what that looks like, rather than if you're talking about the debriefing maybe afterwards so much. I go through the initial session on here's the expectations, but I also have that listed online. I have it listed when it's sent out to the attorneys, and then I go over it with them in session. This is what working with your family is going to look like, and I do go over that.
And you wear different hats in different types of cases, right?
Yes.
What can you just describe 3 or 4 roles that you play in litigation and then also in private practice.
Sure. So in addition to conducting psychosexual evaluations and risk assessments for either, a pending crime or someone who's already been convicted, and I'm just determining the likelihood that they would commit the crime again, I also offer parenting facilitation services. I've served in consultant roles. I love writing deposition questions. One of my favorites. I've served in a role where I educate the courts and then child custody evaluations.
And have you engaged in any family reunification therapy?
That's about 80% of my work on the resistor fuse dynamics, yes.
Right. And so could you explain to our viewers what that type of therapy, reunification, is, and how it would even come up in the context of a family law case?
Sure. So generally, I will refer to that as, sometimes I notice that attorneys will say, we want reunification therapy, and others will say, I want family therapy. And here's the most important thing, is you're functioning as family therapy. That's what you're doing, is your family therapy, because most of us are serving in an outpatient, right? We're not an intensive type of a program. And so if it's because we don't have the intensive program and we have the outpatient program, we're going to need everything. Everything's got to start first with that appointment order, and then go into the rest of the forms, the documentation, before we can even really begin with them. Did that answer?
Yes. So most importantly, though, that just to be clear, the order that we draft is from attorneys,
Yes.
And then we submit that to the court. And typically, I think your preference, and all counselors that I deal with in our context, is to consult with you for your model form.
Yes. Great question. I do ask that. Please ask us first and use our model form, because what will happen if attorneys draft the order, they leave out a lot of things that a counselor will need. We need a certain things to cover our licensure. We need it listed in the orders. And so sometimes the attorneys will just say, you've been appointed, here's your order. And it might be 1 page long. That's not enough.
or sometimes they'll even, I've seen, say, I drafted temporary orders. Here's a 1 line that says that you are the reunification therapist, and that's absolutely not enough, right?
That is not enough. And it's also not enough just to name us. Check first. That's the most important thing, is check our availability, because most of us who specialize in family forensics, we have a very long waiting list, and we want to do what's right for clients. And
So when I get these trepidatious clients who are very scared about, oh gosh, a lot of them have the parent who feels that the other parent has wronged the child or has done something where they they don't deserve to be in that child's life. But the court says, nope, Texas wants us to have 2 involved parents if it's healthy and if it's
Sure.
in the best interest. What would you tell clients to expect with their kiddos in preparing them to deal with you, and what they should or should not say to their kids before coming into a reunification situation?
so for the parents, they could help by the attorney saying, you have to take this seriously. This is a court appointment order. And make sure they really want to go through with it. I mean, I know that they're appointed, but make sure that they're going to follow what we're asking them to do on our appointment order, as well as the paperwork that I have lined out. So review that with them. As far as the children, there's so many different things that parents could say, such as, okay, so let's say that the parent really engages some terrible behaviors. One of the things that they could say is, okay, I know that mom or dad in the past, they engaged in A, B, and C. We'll call it the bad behaviors.
Okay.
However, having mom or dad in your life is very important. We're going to give them another chance.
Is there any age that you believe is too late for reunification?
Oh, challenging question, because my answer is it just depends. But generally speaking, there's a lot of concern when someone comes in a little bit too late, such as age 17. very hard to work with that time frame, because you have to consider that we're in court quite a bit just because of the nature of our work. And so that means, let's say that we're in court, we have to cancel our sessions with the clients, and then the child's about to age out, and then something happens in their life, somebody gets sick. So you can see how that can drag out. So 17 is really, really concerning. I think that it's better to start somewhere between about 8 to 14. And again, that's not a black and white. It just depends. But a lot of caution with someone who's 17. Both parents, if you're in the work with someone 16, 17, the parents need to be willing to be in your office every day. Work the workbooks, because there's different workbooks I'll use, but work the workbooks, learn the skills that we work on, like cognitive distortions or whatever I ask them to do. They've really got to be diligent and follow through with what they need to take care of to get through the program. Many parents do not do that.
Well, and sometimes we have the parent who has the child most of the time or all the time, and then the parent who is desiring to see that kiddo and to have another chance. The parent often comes into my office and said, well, it's too late. He's done too much or she's done too much. We can't fix this. But the judge has said, you must fix this. So at age 15, I think, is where I feel like once they get a sense that they're about to go drive and they can really honestly, they get their license at 16 and see ya. Like, neither parent gets to see me that much, right?
Yeah. 15 can be a little challenging. It's not impossible. So much of it depends on the effort that we'll call them the outed parent, that the outed parent will place into the process. If they really believe that having a relationship with both parents, if they believe that that's important, they will push that kid to go into the sessions that's set up and say, okay, I know you want to drive and you want to be with your friends. However, having a relationship with your dad, just could be dad or mom, but
sure,
having a relationship with your dad is very important, and I'm going to support that. That's a different type of statement than someone saying, Monika, I really believe that repairing this relationship is important. However, little Susie has softball, piano, soccer, twirling lessons, if that's still even a thing, and just 6 different events. Can we meet in your office at Sunday at 2? Would that work? That sends a message to me that you're really not invested in the process.
Right. So when you look back at all of the cases you've done thus far, do you have any that stand out, or one in particular that you feel like is a complete victory or something you really worked hard at with the family where they overcame major challenges?
I would say several of them were the fathers, and a mother or a father could be irrationally rejected. I think probably the cases that stick with me the most are the ones where we don't want to really call them false allegations, but maybe we could, just because the definition's really not settled on what's
Sure.
false and what's not. But we'll say false allegations. Those are the most challenging cases. And I've had several where it worked out in court, and they had trials, and the father had a good outcome, and they determined that the mother was in fact fabricating some very malicious things about the father.
And in those cases, obviously you think that this reunification therapy was integral in making this change.
That, and I always tell everybody, though, my wand is not that magic. Okay. So we play a role in facilitating it, but you also have to have a very strong court appointment order and 2 parents who will have some effort, right? They have some stake in it. They really want a positive outcome. And so if you have parents that will at least participate, more importantly, they have a reverence and respect for the court. That's what we need. And that helped contribute to a positive outcome, because they didn't want to go to jail.
And that's pretty extreme. So the motivation here is not just I want my child to have both parents in their lives. It's the consequence behind it.
Yeah.
And I think what you're getting to is you can have all the paper in the world and you can have all the appointments in the world, but it really comes to the efforts of the person and what the parent who needs to bring their child to the center and bring them to your office, and also maybe stop the rhetoric of, this is what he was in the past, or this is how she was, because people can be redeemed and people do come up from moments of weakness or trauma, and they can improve.
Absolutely. I always tell my families that you can't see forward if you're looking behind. And another one of my mottos to remember just with this entire process is that it is definitely a marathon. It is not a sprint.
And I think that's a really good point. In any therapy, it's my daughter and I were working out the other day, and this is her second time, and she said, "Mom, I don't have any muscles." So, well, we've gone twice together, honey. So you're not going to get immediate returns on your second session of reunification therapy, but maybe 2 months in, 5 months in, a year in, and we've taken a child who didn't get in the car with a parent to now they're going and spending the night and maybe even going on trips. And I think that to me is what the promise of true reunification therapy can turn into. And it's very hopeful. And I'm not saying that every case is that way,
Right.
but I think that's what success to me looks like.
Yes. Definitely. And I like what you said, because it doesn't happen overnight. And that's what a lot of families want. And I get it, especially if you're the outed parent. You want, it can't happen quick enough. You want it to go like yesterday. And I understand that view where the other parents sometimes, we're moving too fast. And so it's a push-pull dynamic, and you have to learn to be able to operate with that. But definitely, it is a process. And generally speaking, reunification, family therapy is not going to occur overnight. Even in 4 or 5 months, if you have a history of, let's say, for instance, 3 years of not being around a parent, you can't expect to repair that in 3 months. That's not practical, because you have to work with both of the parents where they have skills, where they can communicate with each other. I'm not asking that they're going to be best friends. They don't have to have Thanksgiving dinner together, but they need to be able to work together just amicably, like a business partner or a co-partner a business colleague that maybe they really don't like so much. So there's a lot of skills in place, and the children learn skills. That takes time. And what happens is we have the attorneys saying, "Monika, we want you to complete this in 3 months." That's not practical.
So what's more realistic in terms of a parent who hasn't seen their child or had a significant relationship for greater than 2 years? What's the time frame that you would suggest would be more realistic than 3 months?
That is very challenging to have an exact time on that, because it just depends on what other dynamics might come into play rather than just time. You have so many different factors to look at. I mean, time is one of them, certainly, and it's very important to consider the time. But it's also, look, our belief system will guide our behavior, okay? So we have to understand what the child believes about the other parent. So it's not just the time, it's the belief system behind everything. It's the participation and cooperation of the parents. So that's why when attorneys say, "Could you give me an update on how long exactly this will take?" Like, it just depends.
Well, sure. It's sometimes like when my clients will ask me, what's going to happen at trial, I have a magic 8 ball in my office. I think we won it at Pinstack. It was like, 50,000 tickets but they'll shake it and it'll say, "Try again." And it's truly a metaphor, though, because we don't know what's going to come out. We don't know what your child's going to say to their counselor. We don't know how reunification will go, or even if, other factors that are beyond all of our control. So for a major takeaway for today, and it's been really great having you today, what would you like to communicate about just your role and people out there who are desperate and sad about, I haven't seen my kiddo in 3 years. I'm really a good person. Maybe I used to do a drug. Maybe I used to be violent. I've gone to lots of therapy. Is there any hope for me?
I would say definitely yes. Make sure that you have a forensic informed therapist, that they are trained. Generally, the child will need their own therapist as well. That therapist also needs to be trained, because we don't want a therapist that's just simply validating emotions over. There's a place and a time and place for that, but you really need a really good, strong team in place. So you would need the family therapist in place, sometimes the child therapist in place. And if one of the parents is struggling with the process, you also sometimes need 2 individual therapists for the parents. So that's not always your starting point, but sometimes depending on the dynamics, if they're very convoluted, you might need a therapist for the children and the parents as well. So it's having a good team in place. If it's a lighter type of resist refuse dynamic, meaning the issues aren't as entrenched, sometimes the family therapist, reunification therapist, they're able to work with that family in that role themselves. Other times you need a team in place.
And so if our viewers out there want to, if they're attorneys and they want to refer to you, or if they would like to, clients who want to come see you as a counselor or a consultant, how would they reach you?
So that would be on my website,
Okay.
www.texaspcs.org, or in email. And I have a wonderful admin, so
Okay.
call our office.
And your office is in Frisco,
Yes,
correct?
we are in Frisco. Mm-hmm.
Okay. Well, thank you so much for coming today
Thank
and all
you.
of your wisdom.
Thank you.